Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is January 2nd of 2020. Thank you so much for joining me. The title of today's podcast is Iran in the Crosshairs. There was an attack this evening of an Iranian general who was traveling in Iraq. He has been killed. We were going to get to that. I'm going to read to you an article from the New York Times because this is a breaking news story, so I want to give you as much of an update as I possibly can. And then we're going to do a little bit of analysis on this because just yesterday, we did 2020, the year ahead, and I said these global protests, all of this military spending that we're seeing around the world, this is going to potentially lead to some sort of an outbreak, some sort of a conflict, maybe even an all-out war. We hope that this is not the case, but this appears to be a further escalation, one that has been this maximum pressure campaign by Donald J. Trump and his administration on Iran and other hostile nations. Typically, this has been economic. Now it appears to be progressing, if you will, to the military front. So I will get to that momentarily, but we did have another record-breaking day in the U.S. stock market. The major averages were up across the board. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 1.2%, an increase of 341 points. The S&P 500 gained 0.9%, up 28 points. The NASDAQ 100 gained 1.6%, and the broader NASDAQ gained just about as much and is now well over 9,000 points. Again, another all-time record. So the melt-up from 2019, the last few months of 2019, is continuing despite further economic news that came out last night and throughout today in regards to Purchasing Managers Index. Again, these things are leading economic indicators. Down, some of them slightly up, and a lot of them flat to down. I mean, there's further deterioration. We have not bottomed out. And these markets, these global stock markets, do not care. Of course, there was a divergence today in the major averages against the Russell 2000, the small cap index, which at its low point today was down nearly 0.8%. But of course, nothing can stay down forever, not in this melt-up phase, not in Fairylandville. So the Russell 2000 closed down 0.1%, basically flat for the day, despite being down 0.8% earlier in the trading session. This is why I like to do these podcasts later in the evening, because anything could happen during the day with these stock markets. Anything, because they are completely rigged. It is completely false. It is a complete fraud. This is criminal as far as criminal can be concerned. And there's no end in sight. There is literally no end in sight with this, because I can continue to talk about Purchasing Manager Index numbers, which I'm going to get to here. I can continue to show you all of the data I want to, all of the presentations on capital economics, and of course more to come. Markets just keep grinding higher. It's just a continuation of a melt-up phase. Why? Because we have a Federal Reserve and other central banks the world over that continue to prime the presses. And when you look at those graphs, and when I'm going to show you that in the capital economics presentation, you're going to see that it's a one-to-one relationship. This is something we talked about yesterday. Even Deutsche Bank came out with their research, their report, and their findings were, yep, it's a one-to-one relationship. As goes central bank liquidity printing, so go global stock markets. And of course, we had the People's Bank of China injecting more currency into their system as well. And of course, investors rallied on that news. Again, this is not capital. This is not true growth. This is not innovation. This is not competition doing its thing to better society. This is fraud. This is counterfeit. This is the society in which we live. And it's not just unique to the United States. This is global. We are a planet in decay because we just want materialism things. We just want material things. And we want the stock market to go up at any cost. It doesn't matter why. Just keep going up. That's not the type of society I want to be a part of. It's not a society that any one of us should want to be a part of. It's not healthy. It's not good for anybody, despite how many profits you might be making. Just being in this market, you're profiting off of this. I'm profiting off of this as long as this continues to go up. And believe me, I don't like it. But what other game are you going to play? Unless you're ready to go off the grid I mean, this is the system that is created. So what are you going to do? So that's where we find ourselves. Now, getting to the PMIs, we did have an uptick in the Indian market manufacturing PMI, sitting at 52.7. Remember, folks, 50 is that neutral level. Anything above 50 shows expansion. Anything below 50 shows contraction. So again, the Indian manufacturing PMI rests at 52.7, higher than a month ago. We have Turkish industry manufacturing PMI flat. Swedish up a little bit. Hungarian up a little bit. Netherlands down a little bit. Norwegian up a little bit. Poland up a little bit. Spain down a little bit. Let's see, the big boys who we want to talk about here is Germany. Their market manufacturing PMI continues to deteriorate, resting at 43.7. Even the European Union continues to deteriorate, now resting at 46.3 from 46.9. Again, everybody was saying these are bottoming out. These are bottoming out. The PMI figures, the ISM figures, these are going to start to bottom out. Well, they're not. They're not. They're continuing their downward trajectory, which is no surprise to us here at the Capital News. The UK also deteriorating further, resting at 47.5. Well, what about what's going on here in the United States? Is there anything making sense here? Well, it was further deterioration. 52.4 from 52.6. So not a huge drop by any stretch of the imagination, and still north of 50. So still showing expansion, but at a slower rate. What about our friends to the north? Canada. They're resting at 50.4. That was below last month, and that was below expectations of 51.9. See, I don't understand, folks, how we're supposed to be a thriving economy if our friends to the north and our friends to the south in Mexico are showing further deterioration, because Mexico, for all intents and purposes, is in a recession, and their manufacturing PMI is also continuing to deteriorate. It's resting at 47.1 from a previous reading last month of 48. So how can the U.S. economy continue to be fantastic? Of course it isn't. But how can you make that claim? How can Donald Trump continue to make that claim that this is the greatest economy ever in the history of the United States, when our neighbors to the north and south are, well, at least for Mexico, is most definitely in recession, and I don't think Canada's too far behind? How is the United States going to thrive when our neighbors, who we do a lot of trading with, those are two of our largest trading partners, by the way, are declining? Not to mention the trade war that continues with China. That's not going away anytime soon either. And remember, most of this trade war stuff is a bunch of headline noise. You pay attention to it, of course, and we talk about it here all the time. I don't like to, because we've been jerked around for going on 2 years, but it is the news and it is important. You're talking about two of the largest economies in the world going at it with a trade dispute. You know, you're going to have to focus on it to some degree, and we do. But that's noise. These PMI numbers and a whole host of other economic data was already deteriorating before the trade war even started. What the trade war has done is simply exacerbated these problems. And it just gives cover to Donald Trump and some other politicians to just point the finger at a trade war if they have to. And it also provides cover for a lot in the financial sector and even the financial media to say everything is fine, it's just this trade war. And if we can get over this trade war hump, everything's going to be fine and dandy on the other side. Well, it's not going to be, because the trade war didn't cause these problems. It just piled on to what was already in existence. And remember, the theme for 2020, according to us at the Capital News and according to Deutsche Bank, is that there's too much debt in the system. The piper needs paid. Corporations are starting to get pinched. You got higher wages. You're going to have a slowing of demand globally. Profit margins are going to get pinched. What happens when profit margins get pinched? People start to get laid off. You got to look at the hours worked, because hours lead bodies. We talked about this before. Hours will get cut before people get laid off. So we're starting to see that slowing down in hours worked. And then it's just a matter of time before the layoffs start to pick up as well, because it's strictly business. That's all it is. It's strictly business. This is highly predictable. Of course, Donald Trump and his administration and his supporters want to point to the fact that wages have increased. This is true. This is true. This is what happens in late-stage business cycle action. Look it up. This is what happens. The analogy I always give is like climbing Mount Everest. Once you get to the top, it's the peak. The only way you have to go from there is down. We are peaking on a number of fronts. And we have already peaked on a number of fronts, and now we are starting to see the deterioration, which is why we continue to see the deterioration in these PMI numbers in the manufacturing sector, and it's also going to start coming across the non-manufacturing sector, which is retail and services, which we're also starting to see further deterioration there as well. And don't forget the cash freight index, transportation's lead. 12 months on a year-over-year basis has shown further deterioration. I've stated here for months, if we continue to see further deterioration in the transport sector, as outlined by the cash freight index throughout the first quarter of 2020, we are likely headed for recession in 2020. We may very well already be in one. But that, to me, is a strong leading economic indicator, and we'll keep you posted on that. Now, of course, this attack that just happened only a few hours ago has had a huge effect on the price of oil. We have WTI up 3%. We now have crude oil trading at $63 a barrel. Brent is up 3.3% and is now trading at $68.30 a barrel. Now, on the flip side of this, we have natural gas, which has just been taking a shellacking. We are awash in natural gas, so the supply is really not an issue. And now, at least right now, throughout most of the North America, United States here, we really are not seeing a cold winter, at least not yet. So there is not a huge demand building for natural gas. So we have natural gas prices down near 5-month lows. So we're going to have to monitor this whole scenario, natural gas and oil, because what's going to transpire here in the Middle East? Will Iran respond? Will they retaliate? Will this thing escalate? Or will this just sort of be a one-off? Remember, it was only a few months ago we had that big attack on that Saudi oil field, and we had oil prices skyrocket on a nightly basis, and they quickly came back down to earth. But where we're trading at right now is slightly below where oil traded following that Saudi oil pipeline strike. So just for a little context, yes, this is a big move. 3% in the oil markets is a huge move. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised by this. This is an attack. This is something that could escalate. There's still a lot of unknowns, so that's not surprising. But just for a little bit of context, this is where we were only a few months ago. So it's nothing earth-shattering, but it could turn into that, which is why we're going to focus on this story here shortly. But this also leads to something that we've been discussing here for a while, especially near the end of 2019. It's something that we're going to continue throughout 2020 because I believe that we're likely going to witness this in some form or another, regardless of whether there is conflict in the Middle East or not. I do believe that we are going to start to see an increase in the price of commodities. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be sustained, but I do think, at least for some short time, at a minimum, we are going to see an increase in commodity prices because you basically have the 1, 2, 3. We got one box which has been checked off for quite a long time, and that's monetary inflation. That's just simply central banks printing money. And they're printing it like it's going out of style because it is going out of style. Box number 2 is financial asset inflation. Well, we've been seeing that for a decade, and now it's in hyperdrive for the past few months in this melt-up. Not just here in the United States, but globally, but specifically here, and particularly here in the United States. The third box that needs to be checked off is consumer prices. And a lot of that could make its way through if there's an increase in commodity prices. Now, we all know that our cost of living has gone up a lot higher than what the government tells us. This is the open secret. Of course, nobody wants to admit it, but everybody and their mother knows it because everybody and their mother goes shopping. You live, you pay rent, you pay your utilities, you go grocery shopping, you got to buy a new car every once in a while, you got to buy a house. Whatever the case is, you know that it's not 2% or anywhere close to that. You know your cost of living expenses have gone up much, much more than that over the past decade. But nevertheless, that's the big box that's still unchecked because once this number really starts to move up, even the government's numbers, even what the Federal Reserve puts out there, Bureau of Labor Statistics, anything that's put out there, that's the number that they're not going to be able to hide. Because even that's going to say, well, that's 3%, it's 4%. And of course, we have a Federal Reserve who might tolerate 3 or 4% inflation because they're going to say, oh, well, it's symmetric. Where we were about 2% is what we're targeting. It was below 2% for such a long time. Now, if it's above 2%, who cares? This is not economics, ladies and gentlemen. You are not going to find this in any economics book anywhere. And if you do, let me know it's not an economic textbook. Okay? It's not. It's fiction. All right? Throw it down the rabbit hole where it belongs. All right, so that's that. We're going to keep our eyes and ears on that. We have gold up 1%, probably a lot on the back of this news as well, a lot of the uncertainty, so somewhat of a flight to safety makes sense. Gold is trading at $1,543. We have silver up 1.2%, now trading at $18.23 an ounce. Again, folks, I still believe that these precious metals are in the midst of a bull market. And I don't mean a bull market for a couple months here or there. It's not about a swing trade. When I say bull market, I'm a long-term thinker. I'm talking for a year, if not longer. And I do believe it will be longer because of what's happening with all of this central bank liquidity, these trillion-dollar deficits here in the United States, all of the fiscal stimulus that's likely going to be forced down the throats of many, many economies the world over, just grasping at straws, hoping for anything to stick, and it's not going to because the consumer, corporations, they are tapped out. Even governments are tapped out, but they have the power to tax. Central banks are tapped out, but they have the power to print, and that's exactly what they're doing. We are racing to the end, and it's not going to be good. So you better be diversified, and you better be vigilant. Another thing that's sort of a head-scratcher, we have this rally in stocks, but we have the US 10-year Treasury, the yield going down. So we have people flocking for safety into the US Treasury market, pushing down yields. Well, that doesn't make sense, does it? If we're at all-time highs and everybody's euphoric and everybody's happy and this thing is just going to keep melting up, why are yields going down in the US Treasury market? Well, perhaps the Federal Reserve is once again intervening, but they're not going to tell us. Maybe they're the big buyer in the U.S. Treasury market because there is really no bigger a market than the bond market. I mean, that's pretty much the granddaddy of them all. Okay? And that's why now, at this juncture, it's so easy for this market to get out of hand and get out of being able to be controlled by the central bank. And that's one of my greatest economic fears, is that the market has its way with yields, with the Treasury market, says, Uncle Sam, this ain't good enough. Federal Reserve, you're not powerful enough. And that's it. That's all she wrote. That'll be the market having its day, and I've been predicting that for years. Because price discovery, free market capitalism will win in the end. What day that's going to be, I have no idea. But it will come. Believe me when I tell you. So that's some of the market performance. Those are some of the things we're going to have to continue to monitor throughout 2020. But let's get to this New York Times article in regards to the U.S. attacks on an Iranian official in Iraq. Again, from the New York Times. President Trump ordered the killing of the powerful commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, Major General Qasem Soleimani, in a drone strike on the Baghdad International Airport early Friday. General Soleimani's death was confirmed by official Iranian media. General Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region, the Pentagon said in a statement. General Soleimani and his forces were responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans and coalition service members and the wounding of thousands more. The strike was aimed at deterring future Iranian attack plans, the statement added. The United States will continue to take all necessary action to protect our people and our interests wherever they are around the world. The killing of General Soleimani was a major blow for Iran and a major escalation of President Trump's maximum pressure campaign against Iran, which began with economic sanctions but has steadily moved into the military arena. The strikes followed a warning on Thursday afternoon from Defense Secretary Mark Esper, who said the United States military would preemptively strike Iranian forces in Iraq and Syria if there were signs the paramilitary groups were planning more attacks against American bases and personnel in the regions. Quote, if we get word of attacks, we will take preemptive action as well to protect American forces, protect American lives, Secretary Esper said. Quote, the game has changed. In Iran, state television interrupted its programming to announce General Soleimani's death. The news anchor recited the Islamic prayer for the dead, quote, from God we came, and to God we return. American officials consider General Soleimani the commander of the Revolutionary Guard's elite forces, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers during the Iraqi war and hostile Iranian activities throughout the Middle East. The American drone strike hit 2 cars carrying Mr. Soleimani and several officials with Iranian-backed militias as they were leaving the airport. American officials said that multiple missiles hit the convoy in a strike carried out by the Joint Special Operations Command. The strike killed 5 people, including the pro-Iranian chief of an umbrella group for Iraqi militias. Iraqi television reported and militia officials confirmed. The militia chief, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, was a strongly pro-Iranian figure. The public relations chief for the umbrella group, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, Mohammad Rida Jabri, was killed as well. Continuing, an earlier attack late Thursday involved 3 rockets that did not appear to have caused any injuries. The strikes come days after American forces bombed 3 outposts of Kataib Hezbollah, an Iranian-supported militia in Iraq and Syria, in retaliation for the death of an American contractor in a rocket attack last week near the Iraqi city of Kirkuk. The United States said that Kataib Hezbollah fired 31 rockets into a base in Kirkuk province last week, killing an American contractor and wounding several American and Iraqi servicemen. Recall, folks, when we had those bombings of those tankers a handful of months ago in 2019, Donald Trump said, we're not going to attack. It's going to be sort of tit for tat. When the Iranians shot down our drone, again, they said no Americans were killed. But if Americans are targeted, if Americans are killed and wounded, then there will be a stronger response, and that is appearing to be the case right now. Continuing with the article, the Americans responded by bombing 3 sites of the Kataib Hezbollah militia near Qaim in western Iraq and 2 sites in Syria. Kataib Hezbollah denied involvement in the attack in Kirkuk. Pro-Iranian militia members then marched on the American embassy on Tuesday, effectively imprisoning its diplomats inside for more than 24 hours, while thousands of militia members thronged outside. They burned the embassy's reception area, planted militia flags on its roof, and scrawled graffiti on its walls. No injuries or deaths were reported, and the militia members did not enter the embassy building. They withdrew late Wednesday afternoon. The Pentagon statement Thursday night said that General Soleimani, quote, had orchestrated attacks on coalition bases in Iraq over the last several months, including the one that killed an American contractor last Friday. General Soleimani also, quote, approved the attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, end quote. President Trump said on Tuesday that Iran would be held fully responsible for the attack on the embassy, in which protesters set fire to a reception building on the embassy compound, which covers more than 100 acres. He also blamed Tehran for directing the unrest. Washington and Tehran appear intent on ratcheting up both their messaging and their forces, raising concerns of a larger conflict. In the past several months, Iranian-supported militias have increased rocket attacks on bases housing American troops. The Pentagon has dispatched more than 14,000 troops to the region since May. And of course, what we have been reporting here, what my analysis has been over the past few months, I believe that number is understated. We're claiming that it's 14,000. I think it's much, much larger than that, but time will tell. Caught in the middle is the Iraqi government, which is too weak to establish any military authority over some of the more established Iranian-supported Shiite militias. Well, isn't that interesting? I mean, we've only been there for a decade. I thought we trained their military. Of course, Iraq has their own problems right now. They are part of the global protest, as is Iran. So you see what's going on here, folks? I mean, the maximum pressure, people are at their breaking point. This is what's going to happen. Now you have a major general who has been killed, an Iranian general who has been killed. How is Tehran going to respond? Time's going to tell. But this is not going to be good. I am telling you, it's most definitely true that the hardliners in Iran are probably advising the president of Iran and the Ayatollah to respond. And I'm sure that means militarily. So we'll see what happens. On Thursday, Mr. Esper said the Iraqi government was not doing enough to contain them. The Iraqis need to stop these attacks from happening and get the Iranian influence out of the government. Well, you got these two statements. They got to do more, yet they're not prepared to do more. They're not equipped to do more. So what does that mean? If we're reading in between the lines, well, maybe it means that the United States is going to have to intervene if we're going to take this seriously, if we're ready to take this to the next level. General Soleimani was long a figure of intense interest to people in and out of Iran. He was not only in charge of Iranian intelligence gathering and covert military operations, he was regarded as one of Iran's most cunning and autonomous military figures. He was believed to be very close to the country's supreme leader, Khamenei, and seen as a potential future leader of Iran. In his speech, this being General Soleimani, in his speech denouncing Mr. Trump, he was even less discreet and openly mocking. Quote, "We are near you where you can't even imagine," he said. "We are ready. We are the man of this arena." Well, clearly he is no more, and President Donald Trump ordered this attack in Iraq to kill the Iranian general and other officials along with him. So we're all about peace and prosperity here at the Kapital News, but we have been warning for quite a while. When you have these global protests that are not transitory but history in the making, when you have economic inequality to the degrees in which it currently exists, when you have the cost of living rising to the degree at which it is, not just here in the United States, but around the world, which is giving rise to a lot of these global protests, when you have the amount of fraud and abuse and corruption and nepotism taking place in virtually all governments around the world, it is only a matter of time before people reach their breaking point, they reach their boiling point, and they stand together arm in arm, side by side, wanting to take back their countries. And also when you have economic sanctions, which as far as I'm concerned is pretty much an act of war against many nations around this world, it is also going to put a huge hurting on all of those respective economies, further putting pressure on those individuals struggling to survive, struggling to feed their families and their children. They reach that boiling point, they reach that breaking point. We are there. This is the crossroads that I am talking about. Unfortunately, we have to make this decision. Hopefully it's one of peace and prosperity, but I doubt that's going to be the case because human history tells us that that is typically not the case. It is typically violence. It's typically conflict. It's typically war. 2020, oh, it's just getting started, and look where we find ourselves. This is going to be a fast-moving story, I would imagine. It's not going to go away anytime soon. I'll do my best to keep you posted to the best of my ability. Thank you so much for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out, leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Kapital News. I am Alex Kareitis. Godspeed.